Elisabeth, thanks very much for speaking to France 24 this evening. You will have heard in that report then these US-led strikes on Houthi targets, at least 16 of them is what we understand. How much is that likely to change Houthis' actions, certainly when it comes to the Red Sea?
I think it really depends on how vital the sites that were hit actually are. I don't think it's going to change the Houthis' actions merely by deterring them emotionally. I think it might well have the opposite effect. The Houthis are well used to suffering airstrikes. They've suffered over 25,000 airstrikes over the course of the last 9 years during the civil war that's been running in Yemen. And they're also well used to hiding their equipment. And of course, they're hardened fighters. This will probably outrage them, enrage them, and feed into their narratives of being the defender of the oppressed, in particular those in Gaza, against the imperialist West, America, Israel, and their allies. So that's the way they're framing themselves. These airstrikes play right into their hands. So unless critical infrastructure genuinely has been knocked out, I would expect them to continue and perhaps even to up their game.
I mean, let's stay with that narrative, Elisabeth. You touched on, Houthis saying that the reason that they're doing the motivation of this is to support Hamas, is to support Palestinians in Gaza. How much of that narrative is at the forefront of these actions, and is there more behind it?
There's certainly more behind it. I don't think we can dismiss the narrative entirely. There's a genuine feeling amongst the Houthis and certainly amongst their base and more broadly in Yemen and the Arab world that somebody needs to stand up for Palestine. So they have been quite opportunistic in seizing this chance to play the hero, but it also works for them on other levels. It works for them domestically because it revives and invigorates quite a tired population after 9 years of war. It works for them regionally because it increases their leverage with the ongoing talks that they're having with Saudi Arabia for the latter's exit from the Yemen war. And it works for them internationally by bringing them massive publicity and by ensuring that Israel's actions in Gaza do have knock-on effects around the world more globally. And I think it's also worth pointing out here that the Houthis are, of course, although they have their own reasons for launching attacks in the Red Sea, they are part of Iran's so-called axis of resistance. So they feed into that broader regional strategy too.
I mean, these strikes today were, of course, US-led, but we know that the UK was involved, Canada, Bahrain, other countries stepping up to the plate equally. I suppose the question is, are the West hands tied? What else can they do to stop these attacks on ships in the Red Sea?
There are very few options open to the West now. Lots of things have been tried, coercive measures, restrictive measures. I mean, things like sanctions, things like curbing the flow of funds to the Houthis, and also the threat of having this multinational maritime force, the increased security presence in the Red Sea. None of this made any difference. There didn't seem to be many other paths open. Now, I think there are still two ways in which the Houthis might be tackled. One is to go harder at it with a diplomatic initiative that would probably have to be mediated by Oman, that has played a fairly neutral game in the region so far. And the other is, of course, to tackle in some way the justification that the Houthis are using, which is the Israel-Palestine situation. If there were a concerted effort to solve that, then at least that would remove the perception of the moral high ground from the Houthis. So those probably are two other courses that could be pursued.
I mean, let's think about how great an impact this is having on international shipping. We know that some countries are choosing other routes. Others are quite simply altering their paths. Economically speaking, this is huge.
That's right. And I think that's why we've seen governments act now. Although the UK Prime Minister's statement did mention that it was also in defence and solidarity with the Yemeni people against the Houthis, with whom the internationally recognised government has been at war for the past 9 years. Well, we've had 9 years to get involved on behalf of the Yemeni people outside those in the Houthi areas, and we didn't. So it's obviously about an economic situation. This is what's pushed us to get involved. We have to remember that around 15% of trade, part of global seaborne trade, passes through the Red Sea. And that equates to about $1 trillion of goods. So that's our reason for getting involved.